Welcome back, friends. This is Martha Boneta in for John Fredericks today. You are listening to the John Fredericks Show live all across our nation. And we have a special guest team up next. We have a father and son conservative team that working on freedom of speech, First Amendment issues, both on college campuses and at home. Our first guest is Tim Phillips. Tim Phillips is the president of Americans for Prosperity. Americans for Prosperity has chapters all across the United States with more than 3.2 million grassroots activists in all 50 states, fighting for free market principles and policies at the state, national, and local levels. Tim Phillips was named a rising star in politics, and in 2012 was named one of Politico's top 25 public policy players. In addition, he has been involved in premier grassroots organizing for over 33 years. Tim Phillips is a freedom fighter and is out there saving America every day. And next we have Cabot Phillips. And that name may sound familiar because you may be familiar with his video about the zombie apocalypse that I think is probably up to somewhere around, 50 million or so views by now. But we'll have him tell us a little bit about that in just a few minutes. Cabot Phillips is the media director for Campus Reform. Prior to joining Campus Reform, he spent time working on numerous campaigns, most recently as the digital grassroots director for Marco Rubio's presidential bid. Cabot is also a YouTube partner, creating and starring in numerous videos which have amassed over 100 million views across varying online platforms. In 2016, Cabot was named to Red Alert's Politics 30 Under 30 list of the nation's most influential young conservatives. And he is on the radio with us right now, live together with Tim Phillips. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Martha. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tim.
Great to have
Martha,
you.
This is the first time I've ever been on the air with Cabot Phillips. So I told him, as dad, I get to speak first, okay? So
I love it. I love it. Well, I think this show needs to go on the road. I think the Phillips gentlemen, the freedom fighters, need to go on the road because you both do such extraordinary things, all across our nation. Campus Reform is what is deemed to be the nation's premier watchdog for college campuses. Is that right, Cabot?
That is correct. Yep, we are reporting every day on the liberal bias and abuses that are going on college campuses. And so I have the wonderful privilege of going around the different college campuses and speaking to students about the importance of defending their First Amendment rights, the importance of holding their professors, administrations accountable. And I also get to have some fun as well, making fun video content, interviewing students, trying to get them thinking, getting them to address important political issues and trying to look at it from a different perspective that they're not getting in the classroom. And of course, I get to have some fun too. You mentioned some of the other fun videos we get to make with some of my other family members as well. But those aren't political, but those are just as fun.
Well, it seems like every time I turn on the TV, I see you. I think you've been on every Fox show there is, and you always do such a great job because this is such an important issue. Tim, how important are freedom of speech, First Amendment issues all across America in everyday hardworking Americans' homes? How important is this?
Now, the First Amendment is a foundational aspect of American life. It protects Americans from being told by their government that they can't speak out and speak their mind. And I'm really excited about what Campus Reform is doing on campuses because, I have 4 20-somethings and one is still in school. She's at a good school, Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, where they don't have this craziness that we see on some of the other campuses around the country. But it's had a chilling effect on speech. And I know at Americans for Prosperity, Martha, as we're doing events, trying to push back against some of the far left craziness on climate change, global warming, they've tried to silence and intimidate voices on that issue very often. They're saying things like, oh, you're a climate denier, and actually telling some businesses and corporations that if they don't acknowledge the existence of climate change or global warming, that they'll actually sue them in court. So there's been chilling examples across the political spectrum in this country, from the hard left, the far left. And I think it's so important that we push back on this, and that, frankly, we feel the freedom in a responsible way, but that we feel the freedom and have the nerve to continue speaking out on these issues, Martha. And frankly, that's what you and John Fredericks do on this show across Virginia and across the country. And we thank you for what you're doing.
No, thank you, Tim. You travel all over the country. What is a message that our listeners can hear today on the show in terms of if they feel like they're being silenced? Because conservatives are being silenced, and I know, Cabot, I'm gonna ask you how conservatives are being silenced across universities all across our country. But Tim, what message can we give our viewers if they feel like their voice is being silenced because they are conservatives? It's a conservative message. What can they do? What should they do?
First and foremost is bold. I think a lot of times the left depends on intimidation. They'll use sarcasm, or they'll use sometimes the courts, or they'll use the bully pulpit of university officials and other sometimes corporate officials to try to silence you. And we've seen examples even with the new media, YouTube and others, Twitter, and those, by the way, are great platforms for social interaction, and they're great American innovation. So we're glad for that. But we have seen times that have been documented where they have silenced, pulled video content that was perfectly clean and good and focused on the issues because they did not like the issues that these conservatives were covering. And YouTube and some of these outlets that have done that, everyone makes mistakes. They ought to own up to those and move on. And part of it is conservatives being bold, having the courage to stand up and speak their mind. Again, doing so in a way that wins people over to our cause. I think there's plenty of anger out there, and anger has a place. Righteous indignation is an important emotion occasionally, but I think we also need to show a compassion and a love and an energy and an excitement and a fun side, because we're selling freedom. Andrew Breitbart was a good friend of mine. In fact, his last public event before he tragically died of a heart attack was at an Americans for Prosperity event in Michigan. And Andrew said, if we can't sell freedom, what on earth are we doing? It's the greatest thing on earth. Let's sell it, but let's sell it with fun. And that's what Andrew did. And I like to think of us as, happy warriors in a cause for freedom, and really perhaps one of the greatest causes you can possibly be involved in.
So true. The fight for freedom. Absolutely. And Cabot, tell us a little bit about how conservatives are being silenced on campus. Your videos are incredible. And, I always say that voters vote with their pocketbooks. And shouldn't it be the case that, parents say enough is enough at some of these universities that cost a lot of money? It costs a lot of money to get higher education in our country. Shouldn't parents say enough is enough? I don't want to be sending my kids to these universities where my children are silenced because they're conservatives.
I think that's absolutely what it's going to take to reform the problem. Much of it is going to be market forces coming into play, and parents and students really evaluating universities on issues that matter to them, saying, is this school doing its best job to provide a balanced education? Is this school really enabling a marketplace of ideas? And if not, we're not going to send people there. And I think those market forces are ultimately going to help reform campuses for the better. But when you talk about how is this happening, for people who don't know, what does free speech suppression look like on a daily basis on a college campus specifically? Because I think that's a good kind of example of society as a whole. And there's a few things. First off, it just comes in the classroom with professors. We've done studies where for every conservative-leaning professor, there are 12 liberal-leaning professors if you look at their political donation history. So, of course, there are going to be more liberal professors in the classroom. That comes out where there is an innate bias that's being displayed, and students feel intimidated into speaking up, and students feel like they can't have a real conversation because many times their grades are docked and biased assignments are given out. So that's one way in the classroom. A second way is at an administrative level. School administrations are heavily stacked with far left-leaning and liberal-leaning members, and so oftentimes student groups that are conservative struggle to get any funding from the university, whereas liberal counterparts get far more funding. We've seen these new security fees where whenever a conservative speaker is brought to campus, many universities around the country will say, okay, you can have that event, And then right before the event, they'll say, oh, there's a potential that this could be a controversial event, so we're going to charge you $10,000 to bring this speaker so we can have security. And so when the school gets to deem who's controversial, then of course they're going to say the conservative speakers are controversial. And so that is a way they're able to keep conservative speakers off campus. And thirdly, I think the free speech suppression, it comes from a societal standpoint where conservative ideas on college campuses and really for Americans around the country, I think people experience this, are deemed unworthy. They're deemed, they're given all these names. They're called, horrible names, racist, Nazis, and bigots, and all of these things. And I think a lot of Americans, they do a cost-benefit where they say, is it worth it? Is the risk of me being labeled all of these horrible, untrue things, is it worth it for me to get involved in the political process? And I think that Americans need to weigh the cost and realize that this is their freedom at stake, and it's worth standing up and fighting for, and realizing, too, that there are many people that don't have the courage to stand up, but when they see someone around them do it, they're emboldened, and they feel like they can go make a difference because they see other people doing it.
No, thank you, and thank you for everything you do, Cabot. Do you feel like students that are conservatives oftentimes want to hide the fact that they're conservatives on campus because they're worried about, some sort of retaliation? Do you feel like that's a trend that's no longer the case because of efforts like what you're doing and so many others at Campus Reform? Do you feel like students are more empowered now? They don't feel like they have to hide the fact that they're a conservative, or do you think that is still an issue?
We're making progress. I think now that people realize that there are resources they can use, that there are more vocal young conservatives, that I think they're feeling more emboldened, but there is a lot of work left to do. Every time I'm on a college campus with Campus Reform, I have people come up to me after a speech or after I'm filming or whatever it is, and they'll say, I love what you're doing, I love the message, but I have to stay quiet. I can't let anyone know I'm conservative because, my friend came out as a conservative in class, and all of a sudden his paper started getting graded more harshly, or my friend came out as conservative, and all of a sudden everyone on social media was coming at them, threatening them, calling them a Nazi and everything. And so I think that there are people that are wanting to join the fight, but they're just afraid. They need to be pushed over and kind of given more encouragement before they get involved. But really, truly, it's antithetical to what America is about, to create an environment where people are afraid to speak up and afraid to speak their political views. If we can't have political dialogue and if we can't discuss our differences on a college campus, where can we do it? And I think that really we have an entire generation of people that's going out into the real world. Millennials are now the largest voting bloc in America. And many of them they're voting with a warped perception of what America is about because, sadly, they're not being taught the fundamental core principles of the First Amendment, of freedom of expression and freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And so we need to, I think it starts with beginning to teach, again, the basics of what, our nation was founded on and where their rights come from and why they're so important.
That's great. Tim, as you travel all across the country, are you seeing conservatives being more vocal and more outspoken as a result of... Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Martha. It depends on where you are. There are parts of the country where it is a lot tougher to be vocal for conservatives, and I think sometimes they're nervous about getting out there. Our base, our folks are. I can tell you, though, given the threats facing our nation, given the fact that we have had enormous progress in the last year, I think about this economy, Martha. Cabot mentions millennials. The Bureau of Labor Statistics points out that 1 in 3 millennials still lives at home with a parent or parents.
Can I move back in with you?
Cabot's moving back in next week. We're thrilled about that, Martha. But in general, it's not a good thing. 1 in 3, that's the highest percentage of 18 to 34-year-olds living at home with a parent since 1947, when the GIs, 46, 47, when the GIs came home from winning World War II in 1945. Think about what that means. It means a generation where 1 in 3 of our most precious resource, our next generation, they're having to delay careers. They're having to delay sometimes families and marriages and children because they can't get that career moving. They can't see a pathway to prosperity. In effect, it's the American dream delayed and deferred for so many of our young people. And we're finally seeing an economy. We saw the tax cuts and the tax reform that were passed last year. The president deserves a lot of credit for that. A lot of the rollback of regulatory red tape and bureaucracy from the Obama years are being cut out and rolled back, and we're seeing this economy budding again, growing again. We cannot have this reversed, and so it's a crucial time. We hope conservatives will get out there and fight in the arena. I have to say, and I say this, maybe this is a point of privilege as a dad, but I am proud of what campus reform and what Cabot's doing on campuses, because I think it's most difficult there to speak out. I've been on a lot of college campuses over the last decade plus, speaking myself, and it is a stifling environment far too often. And so I'm thrilled with what he's doing. I know this, Martha. When he was a kid growing up, he certainly gave a lot of free speeches around our house. And boy, were they long-winded and a lot of hot air. I mean, so although somehow appropriate that he goes into this field.
Although, as my dad, growing up, my dad made it abundantly clear, Cabot, this is not a democracy. This household, this is a temptatorship, okay? And
I like that.
And your mother and I are in charge. Your mother and I are in charge. You and your siblings.
I love it. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you both to let our listeners know how they can contact you, how they can become a member of Campus Reform, if they can have, how do they get chapters at their own universities, at their own colleges? How do they empower other students to speak up? And then also, how to join Americans for Prosperity. What a force to be reckoned with. 3.2 million grassroots activists all across the country fighting for freedom. But before we do that, Cabot, Phillips, I have a question for you. This is a really important question. Are you ready? The question is, can you make waffles as good as Mr. Tim Phillips? Because we see his pictures all over these massive waffle fests he has. And I just want to know if you can make waffles as well, if not better.
I have to earn the privilege of getting the secret family recipe. And for your listeners who may not know, my dad's waffles are definitely Virginia famous. I think they're bordering on world famous. And he's been making them every Saturday morning since I can remember. And now people around the state have gotten to try them. I cannot make them the way he can, but really I wouldn't want to even try because I'm afraid of failure in that department. And, it is. I'm sure there will be a special ceremony one day where he passes the official recipe down to. Maybe once I have children, he'll give me the recipe.
You do store gallons of peanut butter, right?
Yes. Dad he puts liquid peanut butter on them. We've got whipped cream, all sorts of different syrups, and he puts lots of fruit on his waffles, which I'm not completely accustomed to because he's a little bit more into all the berries and things like that than I am. I'm just give me the whipped cream and the liquid peanut butter and syrup.
Well, good.
But when it comes to people that want to reach out and get involved, and if you do reach out to me just for the waffle recipe, I'm not going to give it to you. But if you're reaching out to get involved with Campus Reform, we have a tip line, contact at campusreform.org. Our website's campusreform.org, and we have people around the country, students that are sending us in stories that they write the stories themselves, and anytime people on a college campus want to get involved, or people who aren't on a college campus but have issues that they think need more light shed on them, we are always looking for tips, for potential stories, for schools where you think someone should come and hold an event so we can really bring free speech to the campus. But that's where you can find us, contact at campusreform.org. It's our email, and I would love to hear from as many people as possible.
Well, you're doing a great job.
And I'm at Americans. Yeah, we're at AmericansForProsperity.org. AmericansForProsperity.org. Get involved. You can click on your state. So I know Virginia, a lot of listeners, but also across the country this morning you're listening. You can click down to your state, get involved. You'll meet field staff and activists, other conservatives from your area. It's wonderful to know you're not alone in this fight. It's not just you. It's not just folks in your community or friends or family. It's not just people in your state. You can be part of a national conservative movement that's working to make freedom and prosperity permanent. Because, Ronald Reagan always said, nothing's assured more beyond just the current generation. It doesn't suddenly go through the bloodstream. We have to do the hard work of preserving it. And at Americans for Prosperity, we're doing that.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I don't know about everybody else listening, but if you're not inspired after this special segment we just had with Tim Phillips and Cabot Phillips, check your pulse. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for
Martha.
joining us.
Thanks, Martha.
Bye-bye.